Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you again for being with us. It's a beautiful day here today. We're a little bit cloudy and breezy, but mild temperatures. So for January, we're going to be in the 50s today. We're going to continue this morning. We're working every January. We do what we call go back to the basics. We kind of invite ourselves to shake up our thinking, right? To kind of get things moving and ask ourselves, well, how do I know what I know? What do I really believe? Have I grown in the last year? Do I want to grow in the next year? Just kind of re-examining things, and it's really good to do that. It's really a great exercise to go in there every once in a while and ask yourself, what do I know and how do I know it? What do I believe and why do I believe it? So the first 4 chapters in the Introduction to the Science of Mind textbook by Ernest Holmes, as we covered last week, it's kind of Ernest Holmes restating Thomas Troward's book, The Creative Process in the Individual. And Troward was basically saying, if we boil it down to its simplest idea, is that there is a creative process in the universe. There's a process by which this thing that we call God, whatever our idea of God might be, there is this process by which it creates. In the creation mythologies of the world, this is an act of will and volition. It may be stated in many different ways depending upon the culture that the mythology comes from. But creation is a deliberate act of this divine power. And this deliberate act is an act of thought, an act of choice, an act of will, an act of volition. In our culture, we're probably most familiar with the book of Genesis, where it says, and in the beginning, there was chaos, there was void, there was darkness, and all those terms that it uses, and it says, and then God said, let there be. So this saying, let there be, this is a declaration. We would call that in theological terms. It was declared. God declared, let there be. And then something which must be some part of the divine itself, something acting as a blind force, as a power that knows how to do what it was told to do, but never pushes back, never says, no, I don't want to do that, or no, you really don't want that, And it does what needs must be in order to bring into actual existence that which the act of declaration of the divine saying, let there be this, let there be that, let there be the other thing. This thing that we call the law or the doer of the word, you might hear it in Christian theology. The Holy Spirit is the doer of the word. So the Father, the will, the volition, speaks the word. The Holy Spirit or the power acts upon the word. And then you have the physical demonstration, the physical manifestation, or the outpicturing, the physical outpicturing of the equivalent of whatever that spoken word was. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt amongst us. Those kind of things. So Troward says that there's this process in the universe by which it works, and we as individuals, it works in us as well. We have the power to choose, we have will, we have volition. When we make that decision, when we choose what we wish to experience, this same power, not a different power, but this same power that acts upon the word of the divine to bring about creation. So God said, let there be stars and planets. The energy of the universe takes form of stars and planets, and we have stars and planets. To put it very simply, that same process, that same creative process is at work in the individual. So that's what these 4 chapters are about. What is this thing called God? How does God work? What does that have to do with us? And then the last chapter, the one we're going to talk about next week, is actually using it, actually implementing it, putting it into deliberate action in our lives. And I think the word deliberate, we really have to contemplate that, because it is always acting. It is always acting, whether we have taken the time to become aware of our thoughts and deliberately choosing what it is we wish to experience, or we're just kind of running along on autopilot and letting it act upon whatever's going on at the level below our conscious level, our subconscious level, or our subliminal level, whichever you want to call it. So that's what these 4 chapters are about. So this week we're talking about what it does. What it does. The thing we started off with the thing itself. What is your concept of God? Omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence. That's probably, those 3 concepts are probably as close as our human understanding can get. Because as Joseph Campbell tells us, God is a metaphor for that which transcends every limitation of human consciousness. In other words, we can't get our minds around it. Our intellect cannot grasp it. It is not something that is grasped by the intellect. It is not something you can put down into a mathematical formula. It is an experience that we can behold, but it is not something that the mind can understand. You and I cannot understand eternal. We live in an experience of time. We understand beginning, middle, and ends. We don't understand isness or suchness, or that which always was, that which always will be, that which is right now, that which lives in the eternal now, right now. That sounds like double talk to us, you know. But tomorrow's Monday, you know. So we have this thing, this isness, this I amness, this suchness that we call the divine. And its creative process is a process by which will and volition decides, law acting as an impersonal power obeys, complies, executes, however you want to call it. And then you have the physical experience, the actual experience. Let there be stars and planets. Stars and planets are formed. Stars and planets are here. Very, very simple. I realize I'm being very simple. But I think we need to understand things at a simple level to give us a handle on it, to get a place to get started. So this week we're going to talk a little bit more about that process. Remember at the beginning of the month I said there's going to be a lot of overlap. There's going to be a lot of back and forth because these chapters are all interwoven. So this week we're going to talk a little bit more. We're going to kind of deepen a little bit our understanding then of what it does. Not only the way it works, but what it does. How does it do what it does? How does God do that? You know, how'd that happen? It's amazing. It's amazing if we stop and think about it. For me, what works for me is if you go on the web and you pull up the pictures from the Hubble telescope and you look at the vastness of this universe. I mean, you look out at stars that it's taken the light from those stars billions of years to get to you. In fact, the star you're looking at is not in that place anymore. It may be gone. It may have exploded a long time ago. So you're looking into history, you're looking into the past, but if you look into the vastness, you know, it's an awe-inspiring experience to see just how magnificent this entire universe is. I love the pictures, you know, recently they took one, I think, from Saturn looking back towards Earth. You know, there's this little dot, this little speck somewhere in the picture, and there's an arrow pointing to it, kind of like you are here. You know. No borders, no boundaries, no invisible lines, just this little speck floating out in space. And we're there. See, we're there. And we lose sight of that. We get so caught up in the day-to-day activity, we lose sight of just how miraculous it is that we're even here on this rock riding around the sun in the middle of this universe that is so vast that our minds cannot comprehend it. So last week I mentioned to you to think about the power plant. You know, there's a nuclear power plant just a few miles up the road. In fact, every day when I go out and go out the driveway, if the weather's right, I can see the huge steam plume coming up. You know, it's that close. It's only a few miles, maybe 5 as the crow flies from here. That power plant, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I can understand for practical application in my life, that power plant has more capacity, more capability than I could ever use. It produces enough electricity to do everything I would ever want to do with electricity in my home, and then some. I cannot conceive of the possibility of me doing anything at all here in my home that could even cause that reactor to notice. You know, if you've seen, I'm kind of grinning because the flash from the movie Christmas Vacation just came to me, where you know, Chevy Chase plugs in the Christmas lights and the bells and whistles start going off at the power plant. You know that there's an overload. We can't do that. We can't do that. It is omnipotent. Not really. I mean, we know that there's more power than that one plant. But as far as my house is concerned, there is more power there than I can use. Now, what is it that determines how much of that power gets used in my house? It's not the plant. The nuclear plant is acting as an impersonal law, right? It doesn't know whether electricity is going to my house or my neighbor's house. It doesn't care how much electricity goes through my house. Of course, the company does because they're making money off of it. They're metering it. But the nuclear reactor itself, you know, the generators in that nuclear plant, they don't care. They're an impersonal law. They generate electricity, and whoever connects to that plant properly, whoever hooks up the wires properly, they're going to be able to work with that. They're going to be able to use that. But how much electricity can I receive? How much electricity can I receive from that plant? Well, I can receive all that I'm willing to accept. But the acceptance, my acceptance of that electricity is determined by the size of the wires coming into my house, the size of my distribution panel. You know, some of the older houses, when I was out and we were doing heating and air, and people had an old house and they wanted to upgrade it to a heat pump, there wasn't enough capacity in the electrical box to do so. You know, the house in the old days, they might have provided called it a 70 amp service to the house, which just meant that the wires coming in, I don't know if you can see my hand, I'm trying to hold it up and show the diameter of a wire. The wires coming into the house were small. The size of the wires in the distribution box were small. So there's only a certain amount of electricity that could flow through that wire before the wire would burn up. And so the amount of electricity that could go into that house was determined by the size of the connection. Now, other houses built after that, they came in and they had 100 amp service, and they had bigger wires going up. If you look out at your meter, you know, you've got wires that go from your electric meter, and somewhere, if they'll either go underground or overhead, they connect back up to the wires on the poles somewhere, or the wires that are running underground. The size of those wires is going to determine how much electricity you can get into your house. Now, in the case of the old houses, which only had like a 70 amp service, if they wanted to be able to use more electricity, we had to get an electrician to come out and rewire the house. They had to go and put thicker wires up to the power mains. They had to put in an additional breaker box, and they had to increase that capacity. Just want you to keep that picture. And I realize that none of you are probably going to go out and rewire your house, but get that picture. The capacity of that power plant is for our purposes unlimited, but what limits the power that flows into my house is the size of the wires that I've got coming in. If I want more electricity, I have to increase the size of the wire. Now the plant is always there. The plant is always generating electricity. If I'm not getting enough electricity in my home, I don't sit here and say, "Oh, power plant, please make more power. You know, I beg you, I plead you, I beseech of you, please make more power so I can have more power in my house." Power plant can't hear me. The power plant is not listening and say, "Oh, well, I'll just generate more electricity and I'll send more electricity to the gym." It can't do that, you see. It's already giving all the electricity it can possibly give. It's already prepared to do that. What I have to do is I have to increase the size of my connection. All right, I'm going to switch to another example to illustrate the same point. You remember in the olden days when we took pictures that we actually exposed film to light and produced a negative. And then that negative had to be developed and projected onto a piece of paper called a print. And that print had to be developed in chemicals in a dark room because they could not be exposed to the light while they were undergoing the development process. So many people had dark rooms in their, hobbyists had dark rooms in their houses. And they would have to take some kind of a dark material and cover all the openings in a room somewhere so that no light could get in. So I want you to imagine that you're in a room in your house and you're going to convert that into a dark room. So the first thing you do is you turn your electric light on so that as you cover the light from the outside, you'll still be able to see. So you get a very, very dark cloth and you go around and you fasten that dark cloth around all of the windows, all of the doors, every crack in the room. So you seal all of the places where light can get into the room. You seal those off tight, you know, whatever you use. Duct tape is great. But you've got every possible opening for light to enter that room. You've got it covered with that black cloth. Now you go over and you throw the light switch and you turn the electric light off. And what happens? See, now you're in total darkness. Now it's daytime when you're doing this, by the way. So now you're in total darkness. Total darkness. Probably as dark as you've ever experienced. If you've ever been on one of those tours where you go into the caves or the caverns, you know, usually what they do is they get you down there somewhere and then they turn out all the lights. And you experience a degree of darkness that you've never experienced before. It's that dark. You're in absolute pitch blackness. Now suppose you decide you want more light in the room. Now you could pray, you could beg the sun to make more sunlight, but the sun has already made all the light it's going to make. The sun has already given all the light it is going to give. Begging, pleading, and beseeching the sun to do more to get light into your room isn't going to help. But suppose you had in your pocket a straight pin or a needle or something that could poke a hole in the covering. And now you go over to the black curtain and you put one hole, just one tiny little hole. You put one tiny hole in that curtain. And what happens is a little tiny beam of light comes streaming through that hole and you can see it on the floor. The light is now getting in. Now you can go and you can make lots and lots and lots of little holes. You might even get creative and make designs. You know, you could draw pictures and have those light pictures projected on the floor. But the point is, the more holes that you make, the more openings that you provide for the power of that light to get through, the more light enters your experience. Now at some point you decide, well, this is silly. Why don't I just take the black curtains off the windows? So you go and you pull down all of the black curtains off the window, and now the room is flooded with daylight. In fact, it's got so much daylight, it's got too much daylight. The heat is streaming in, your air conditioning can't keep up with it, it's too bright, you got to squint, and now you've got to put window coverings up. You know, you've got to put some kind of shades or blinds or something like that up there. Or even tinted glass. We put tinted glass on the windows because there's more sunlight. There's more sunlight than we need. There's more sunlight than we are capable of dealing with. What determines how much of that unlimited power of the sun that gets into our experience? It is the treatment. It is the treatment that we have on the window. If you want more light, the sun doesn't have to do anything. The sun's already done it. All you have to do is create a greater opening. You have to make a greater connection with the sunlight that is already there. Third example, same idea, but sometimes different pictures work for different people. Third example. When I was a little guy growing up, I loved watching Mr. Wizard on TV. And I'm talking black and white TVs that were huge, you know. Of course, now TVs are even bigger, but I would love watching Mr. Wizard and then trying to reproduce his experiments, his science experiments at home. One of the things that they demonstrated was the surface tension of water, and the different things that you could add to water to change the surface tension around. So the idea was you would go to a friend. You know, everybody always had that gullible friend that you could say, "Hey, you know, I'll bet you lunch on Monday that I can take your finger and I can stick it in this glass of water and your finger won't get wet." And of course they would say, "Oh, there's some kind of a trick here. That's not water. That's something that's going to hurt me." You say, "Oh, no. You stick your finger in there, you pull it out, you show them, see, it's all fine, doesn't burn, nothing there to hurt you. But I'll bet you that I can take your finger and stick your finger down in that glass of water and your finger won't get wet." So hopefully you get a willing victim who will play along with you. And they say, "Okay, you know, show me." So what you would do is you would take a little jar of talcum powder, and you would sprinkle talcum powder on top of the water until you had, you know, a good layer, maybe 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch layer of talcum powder. And then you would take their hand and you have them stick out their finger, and you take their finger and push it down into the glass. And then they would pull it out, and the finger would be dry. Because what happened is, as they were sticking the finger down through the layer of talcum powder, the talcum powder was forming a seal around the finger. It adhered to their skin. And the layer of talc kept the water from ever touching the skin. So here you have this picture. Here you have this person, they have their finger down in the water, and yet their finger is not getting wet because there is a barrier. Because there is this barrier between their finger and the water. If they wanted to connect with the water, what do they have to do? They have to remove the layer. They have to remove the obstacle or the obstruction or the thing that is between them and the water that they want. All right, three different visual images, same concept. There is a power in the universe that is not just a power, it is all power. It is omnipotence. There is a knowledge or a wisdom or a knower in the universe that is not just some knowledge, it is all knowledge. It is omniscience. And it is not out there far away somewhere, it is everywhere. It is omnipresence. So what Dr. Holmes is reminding us of in this chapter is that God already is All of the wisdom already is. All of the power already is. And like the power plant, if we wish to experience more of it, of its peace, of its beauty, of its love, then we have to increase our connection. We have to make a better connection. We have to increase the size of our connection to it. He tells us that all the great poets, the great musicians, the saints, everybody has made their approach to this thing in their own way. So the saint makes contact with it and has a spiritual experience. An artist makes contact with it and draws from it the beauty that is already there. An inventor makes contact with it and brings back from it or receives from it. And think about poking the holes in the curtain, allows to flow through from it the ideas that lead to great inventions that benefit mankind. So each and every one of us has just as much ability to make this divine contact as the greatest saints, as the greatest inventors, as the greatest musicians, as the greatest artists. Because the only thing that we have to work with is our own consciousness. The only thing they had to work with was their own consciousness. And I think this is a very important concept for us along the path of our spiritual growth. It's very important for us to understand this. And it's not that these folks were especially chosen. It's not that these folks were somehow better than or different than you and I. And this is something that I was taught as a child. You know, don't worry about trying to become a saint and have all of these mystical experiences the saints talk about, because you're just a small boy from a blue-collar family. You know, you're in a working-class neighborhood. You know, you need to go live in a cave somewhere and spend the rest of your life looking at the wall and in prayer. And then if God chooses, you'll have this experience. But that was a limiting idea. See, that was a very small wire going back to a big power plant. That was a very small hole in a curtain to let through an unlimited source of light. You and I have just as much ability to create a greater connection to this unlimited power, this unlimited knowledge, as anybody else. As anybody else. Nobody has an advantage when it comes to that. But what it requires is we have to decide. Think of the creative process. Spirit decides what it will have. It declares what it will have. Let there be. And then it lets this blind force, this law, this power that knows what to do the work. Dr. Holmes uses the example of planting seeds in a garden over and over again. And in the parables, teachers use pictures that people can relate to. In the New Testament, you have the parable of the sower of the seeds. People can relate to that. People can understand that. So you go out to your garden and you comply with the laws of nature and the way your garden works, and you prepare the soil. And at the right time, you go out and you take a seed and you put the seed in the soil and you put it in at whatever depth you're told on a little back of those little packets, and you cover it up and you water it. And what do? Then you go away. You go away. You leave it. You don't come back in 10 minutes and dig it up and say, are you growing yet? You cover it up. You leave it. You trust in the process that knows what to do to germinate, to sprout, to produce a stalk, and to grow a vegetable plant. Now, the power that does that operates as a blind force in that it knows what to do in order to germinate that seed and make it sprout. It may know it at a chemical level, right? It may just be purely a chemical reaction. But nevertheless, we'll say that it knows. It has a knowledge. But it does not have the ability to push back and say, well, Jim, you just planted strong onions, and you don't like strong onions. They give you heartburn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you mild onions instead. Jim, you just planted cucumbers, and cucumbers they give you tremendous indigestion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you tomatoes instead. So that's what we mean acting as a blind force. It doesn't change what you have declared by will and volition. The electricity that comes into my home does not know and does not care whether it's lighting a light or whether it's cooking food on the stove. It is a blind force. Whatever circuit I have turned on at the time is the circuit it flows through. So what is it then that determines how much good we can have, how much good we can experience in our lives? And it is the size of our connection to the divine. Now, the only place that we can make that connection is in our own consciousness, in our own mind. And the size of our connection, for the purpose of what we're talking about today, is our faith, what we call faith. Now, in the opening prayer, I said that faith is a knowledge so certain that the opposite idea cannot be entertained. And the example that I love to use is gravity. We all have faith in gravity. None of us wakes up in the morning and says a prayer and begs gravity to work for us today. Okay? We don't get up and kind of hold on to the bed and slowly release our grip to make sure that gravity is working so that we don't float off the bed. We have become so accustomed to the fact that gravity works and gravity always works that we never think about it. We never think about it. From the time you're tiny, from the time you're a tiny child and you learn how to toss a ball, you learn how gravity works. You learn, how far away you can stand so the ball will reach wherever you're throwing it. If you get older and you're playing ball on a team and like baseball or softball, and somebody hits a fly ball and you're out in the field, there's something within you that can judge where that ball is going to come down, and something within you that automatically moves your body to the right position and gets your glove ready to catch it. So without having a word for it, without having a mathematical formula to describe it, we understand that there's this power in the universe that makes things fall to earth. And we never doubt it. We never doubt it. That is perfect faith. That is the perfect faith that we're talking about. So now we have this proposition that there's a power in the universe. As Dr. Holmes used to say when he opened his radio program, there's a power for good and you can use it. There's this power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. If we wish to experience more of it, we want to change our belief. And we want to change not only a belief, but we want that belief to be a faith, a knowledge so certain that the opposite cannot enter our mind. And then the question becomes, well, how do I develop that kind of faith? Can I even change it? And this is a sticking point for some people. They say, well, if I had the faith, I wouldn't have the problem in the first place, so obviously I don't have the faith, so there's nothing I can do about it. Right? That's fatalism. That's not true. You can always change your belief. You can always change your faith without regard to what the circumstances are. You can change your faith. You can change your belief. And how do you do that? Well, the first week we talked about observation and experimentation. Can you look around you and can you see that other people are in fact changing your faith? Maybe you haven't done it yet, but can you see that? And then can you experiment? Can you experiment with ways, techniques to try to change your faith? Can you read? Can you read more? Can you study more? So perhaps reading and studying gives the intellect knowledge, and because it because it feels it knows more about how this thing works, it has a greater faith. And then eventually you have to experiment and say, well, can I try? Can I try to change my own belief? You know, I'm certain there has to be something in your life that you used to believe that you no longer believe. You know, as you grew up and you saw different things and you explored different ways, you changed the way that you believe. So there is a process then by which belief can be changed and can be developed into a faith. And the technique that we teach is spiritual mind treatment, a 5-step process by which we use this power that responds to us according to our belief to help produce more faith in our lives, to help produce a greater change or an opening or an avenue in our consciousness through which that unlimited power can flow. I go back to the analogy of rolling the snowball down the hill. You know, we understand that there's this thing called gravity. We may not even have a name for it, but we understand that snowballs will roll down hills, and we know that if we get to the top of the hill and start a very little snowball rolling, that it will continue to roll down the hill, and it will get bigger and bigger and bigger as it goes. We understand that. So how much faith do we need? Just enough to get started. Just enough to get started. Just enough to start that snowball rolling down the hill. And once we have faith that this power that responds to us according to our belief is in fact working on our behalf, producing within us and through us this greater opening, and we let it go. We let it go. Just like we let the seed in the garden go and we let it grow. We don't keep going back and digging it up and saying, how you doing today? Are you working? We let it go. Now we continue to do our treatments. Dr. Holmes tells us to do our treatment every day until a demonstration is made, because unlike that snowball which can only roll down the hill, sometimes our consciousness can effectively roll back uphill. So Emmett Fox says, change your mind and keep it changed. So we start things moving in one direction, and then all of a sudden we go back the other way. So we do another treatment and nudge it along, and maybe it goes back the other way, and then we do another treatment and we nudge it along. You know, so sometimes it's the 2-step forward, 1 step back school of progression. But my point is that you have to accept, you have to find a way to help yourself accept the fact that faith is something that can be developed, that you start the development with a conscious act of will and volition. You use a specific technique or techniques to get the ball rolling, and you keep the ball rolling until finally there's no longer a question in your mind and the demonstration is made. And we don't have to have absolute 100% complete faith. We just need to believe that it will more than we believe that it won't. Remember, it's always done unto us according to our belief. So if we believe it won't, it won't. If we believe it will, it will. And again, that's going to sound like double talk until you try it. Until you try it. You just have to try it. So faith is something that we can develop. There's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. We might want to tweak that a little bit in response to us according to our faith. That is a belief so certain that the opposite idea cannot enter our minds. And then faith is something that can be developed. It can be cultivated. It can be nurtured. It can be grown through a deliberate act of will and volition, and in cooperation with the law that responds to us. So I have faith that the law is acting upon this word. That produces a greater opening in my consciousness. The only place we're ever going to meet God is within our own mind. The only place we have to work is within our own mind. So this is why he calls it science of mind. We have to work within our own mind. That's the only place we experience anything, is within our own mind. So we recognize then that there's this power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. We recognize then that belief is something that can be developed and cultivated. We recognize that this power is responding 24/7 what we consciously choose to believe and what we already unconsciously believe, it responds to it. It is constantly outpicturing in our lives. And one question that comes up in the chapter that we have to address is, well, if there's just this one power, then why does it appear that there's two? Why does it appear that there's a power for good and a power for evil in this universe? Are there really two powers? And if there aren't two powers, can the one power, can that which is good produce that which is evil? And the short answer is there's only one power, and no, that which is good cannot produce that which is evil. But you and I, we can misuse that power, and we can get to have the knowledge of good and the knowledge of evil, or the experience of good and the experience of evil, even though evil itself is not a real thing. It's not an entity. It's not a power that can sustain itself. We'll go back to electricity. If I turn on the stove and I let the cooking eye get hot and I accidentally touch my hand to the cooking eye, I get burnt. Now, is electricity evil? No, electricity is neither good nor bad. There's only one power. I misused it. I misused that power. If you go back to being in a dark room, I can sit here and I can say, why, oh why is the room dark? Well, I've got this barrier that I allow to remain between myself and the light. Now, if I put a tiny little hole into the dark curtain and I only let a tiny little streak of light into the room, that's not enough light to do anything. I can't read by that light. I can't do anything by that light. My experience of light is limited. Well, is a light evil? No, it's not evil. It's restricted. It's restricted. And this is very important. Once I take that curtain down, it makes no difference how long that room has been dark. That light comes streaming right in. That light comes streaming right in. That darkness that I might have called evil, because it was limiting my ability to experience life, had no power to resist the light, because it was not a real condition to start with. It was a condition that existed because the light was blocked. That's all. That's all. So there's only one power, and it's up to us. We are made accountable and responsible to decide how to use it. And really what we're doing, what our spiritual growth is all about then, is about increasing the size of our connection to that power, which is through the process of building faith, developing faith. By reading, by studying, by observing, by experimenting, by our spiritual practice of meditation, of spiritual mind treatment, of affirmations, of visualizations. That is all that we are trying to do. No superstition, no begging, no pleading. Now, here we need to talk just briefly about love and law. Dr. Holmes tells us all is love and all is law. And he says there's two great mistakes that we can make when we're approaching this idea of God. One is that God is just an impersonal power like that nuclear power plant. And the other is that God is just spontaneous and it doesn't work by law. And it's willy-nilly and it's constantly changing the laws of the universe based on people's petitions and pleading and begging and prayers. And he says what we have to realize is that the divine is a combination. Love is the spontaneity. Love is the will. Love is the saying, hey, you know what? Today's a beautiful day. I think I'm going to go fly a kite today. Right? That's love. That's spontaneous. And then the law is that power that just brings that about for us. So maybe with love, I go out into my garden and I'm going to plant a row of flowers because I know that my beloved loves that particular flower. See, that's love. That's spontaneous. That gets the ball rolling. Then I go out and I plant the flowers in the garden, and the law takes over and makes them grow. And then when they grow, then when they bloom, you see, then the love comes back to the experience in enjoying them and taking my beloved outside and saying, look at what I did, hon. Look at this. Look at these beautiful flowers. Don't you just love those flowers? So we have to understand that it's not all law and it's not all love. It's a combination of both. Love is the spontaneity that gets the process rolling. Love is the joy that experiences the demonstration. Law is the process that brings it about. So I want to close with an example that comes back from the 60s when I was a young adult moving into my teenage years. And of course, Star Trek, the original series, was new on TV. And Gene Roddenberry was the creator of that show. And Roddenberry had a mystical experience in his life. He was in a plane crash one time. And I believe that kind of changed him and perhaps helped him see some more of the mystical. But in this particular episode, and you can look it up, I'm sure it's available on one of the streaming services. It was called Shore Leave, Shoreleave. And the plot is that the Enterprise discovers this new planet. They're out there exploring space, and they discover this new planet, and it's very remarkably like Earth. It's got breathable air, it's got trees, it's got rivers. It's kind of a beautiful place. But there's nobody there. There are no inhabitants on this planet. So what they decide to do is they're going to start beaming the crew down and let them have a little bit of rest and recreation. Let them have some shore leave. Let them go enjoy being out of the ship for a while and having their feet back on ground. And as the crew members beam down and they're walking around and they're enjoying, just imagine a lot of people kind of strolling through a big meadow and woods and streams, and everybody's going to their favorite place. What we can see that they can't see is these tiny little antennas, like a TV antenna, only in miniature. They kind of pop up every once in a while, and they follow along. They point at somebody, and they follow along, and then the antennas disappear. And of course, the big question is, well, what are these antennas, and what are they doing? And then people start having interesting experiences. Captain Kirk suddenly meets his old nemesis from the Starfleet Academy, and the two of them revive their old rivalries. And then there's a crew member who's a young lady, and this medieval knight comes galloping along on his horse, and he swoops her up and he carries her off to a castle where she's dressed as a princess and she's treated as royalty. And another one gets in a duel, and there's all these kind of strange occurrences going on. Nobody can figure out what it is. And finally, at the end of the show, you get the reveal. And this is a recreational planet. Right? And the people who are there, the little antennas that go up, they can read the innermost desires of people's minds as they go by. And then, because it is a recreational planet, they create the circumstances that let the people have the experience that they truly want. Captain Kirk always wanted to punch this guy in the nose, so he got to do it. This young lady always wanted to be treated as royalty, and she was. So at the end, the alien people who kind of run this planet apologize. They say, well, we didn't know that you didn't understand that this was a recreational planet, and we were just acting upon your deepest beliefs because we thought that's what you wanted. So I'll leave you with that. If you can find it and stream it and watch it, it's called Shore Leave. And I realize I've given away the plot, but nevertheless, it'll give you a good visual. There is a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. Whether we are aware that we believe it or we are unaware that we believe it. It always takes us at our word. It never says to us, well, no, that wouldn't be good for you. If that's what you want, then that's what you're going to get. Our spiritual growth, our movement upward, our deeper connection with the divine love, the divine power, the divine wisdom, our spiritual connection is our belief that is elevated to the level of faith. Through our spiritual practice, through our education, through talking to other people, hanging out with other people, through observing and through experimenting. So I invite you this week to just consider these things, and next week when we come back, we're going to talk about how to use it. And so, and so it is. I'm going to get a sip of